What would you do if the thing you loved most was suddenly taken away from you? Pause. For Tim Cruise, flying wasn't just a job, it was his freedom. But one day, a single diagnosis tried to ground him forever. Tim Cruise was a successful businessman and a licensed pilot. Flying gave him peace, a place where the world made sense. Up there, it was just him, the sky, and endless possibilities. He built his company from scratch. Long hours, tough decisions, constant travel. But behind that success, his body was sending quiet warnings he didn't understand. Then came the diagnosis, type 1 diabetes. Pause. The words hit him harder than turbulence at 30,000 feet. His first thought? I can't fly anymore. Because in aviation, safety rules are strict. And for many, diabetes meant grounding your dreams for good. For the first time in years, Tim wasn't in control. Every flight he missed, every business trip he skipped, it felt like losing a piece of himself. But Tim wasn't the kind of man to give up easily. Pause. He decided if diabetes was going to stay, he would learn to live with it, not under it. He started learning how insulin works, how diet affects energy, how to manage glucose while working and traveling. He made diabetes part of his flight checklist. Test, plan, and keep going. Bit by bit, his strength came back. He balanced business meetings with blood sugar checks. He refused to let fear control his wings. Then, after months of persistence, careful control, and medical supervision, he did what many said was impossible. He got permission to fly again. The first time Tim took off after his diagnosis, tears filled his eyes. He wasn't just flying a plane, he was flying past his limits. His story became an inspiration to others with type 1 diabetes, showing that diabetes might change your path, but it can never erase your purpose. Today, Tim continues to balance his life as a businessman and pilot. He mentors young people living with diabetes, teaching them that strength isn't about being perfect. It's about never stopping the climb. Tim's journey reminds us, diabetes doesn't define who you are. It only challenges you to rise higher. So, if you're watching this and fighting your own battle, remember, pause. No matter how tough the storm, the sky is still yours to fly. Imagine spending your whole life chasing the sky, and then being told you may never fly again. Pause. This is the true story of Tim Cruise, a man who refused to let type 1 diabetes take away his wings or his dreams. Soft piano music continues. Visuals. Young Tim gazing at airplanes, clouds passing overhead, cockpit shots. From the time he was a boy, Tim Cruise had one dream, to fly. He loved the feeling of control, the freedom, the calm above the chaos of life below. Years later, that dream became reality. He became a successful businessman and a licensed pilot. Every weekend, he traded his office chair for a cockpit seat. And every flight reminded him why he worked so hard to feel alive. Dramatic music fades in, lighting turns darker. Visuals. Tim in a doctor's office, silent, serious expressions. But life doesn't always stay on course. One day, Tim started feeling weak, thirsty all the time, and constantly tired. He thought it was just stress, until his doctor gave him the news that would change everything. Pause. You have type 1 diabetes. For a pilot, those words were like losing altitude fast. Regulations meant he could no longer fly, at least not without strict medical approval. It felt like someone had clipped his wings. Somber piano plays, close-up of Tim staring out at the runway. Visuals. Tim sitting near a plane, watching others take off. Tim's heart sank every time he saw a plane rise into the sky. The sound of engines reminded him of everything he had lost. He battled fear, frustration, and endless what-ifs. He wasn't just fighting diabetes, he was fighting doubt. How could he run a business, manage his health, and still be the man he once was? Pause. But deep down, he knew pilots don't give up in turbulence. They steady their hands and adjust their course. Music slowly changes to hopeful tones. Visuals. Tim reading about diabetes management, checking blood sugar, jogging in early morning light. Tim decided that if diabetes wanted to fight, he was ready. He learned everything about his condition, how insulin worked, how food affected his sugar levels, and how discipline could keep him strong. He built new routines, early workouts, healthy meals, glucose checks before meetings, and insulin management during long work days. He turned his challenge into a checklist, just like a pilot preparing for takeoff. Inspiring music rises. Visuals, Tim smiling, sitting in cockpit training simulator, medical papers, flight footage. After months of discipline, medical follow-ups, and unwavering focus, Tim got clearance to fly again. That first flight back was emotional. He looked at the clouds, the sunlight pouring through the windshield, and whispered to himself, "Pause. I'm back." He wasn't just a pilot again. He was proof that determination can lift you higher than any obstacle. Soft, inspirational music, warm visuals. Visuals. Tim mentoring young pilots, speaking to people with diabetes, smiling confidently. Today, Tim continues to run his business, travel, and inspire others. He shares his journey with people living with diabetes, showing that this condition may change your flight plan, but it can never ground your spirit. He teaches one powerful lesson. You don't need perfect health to live a full life. You just need courage to keep going, one check, one choice, one day at a time. Music swells to emotional peak. Visuals, plane flying through golden sunset skies. Overlay text, keep fighting. Keep flying. Tim Cruise's story reminds us, diabetes may be part of your life, but it doesn't define your destiny. So keep believing, keep learning, and keep flying. Because the sky, it's still yours. What if the dream you built your whole life around was suddenly taken away? Pause. For Tim Cruise, the sky wasn't just a destination, it was his freedom. But one diagnosis tried to ground him forever. Gentle piano music continues. Visuals. Tim smiling in his pilot uniform, walking toward a small private plane, checking controls. Tim Cruise was a successful businessman, sharp, determined, and always chasing new heights. When he wasn't running his company, he was flying planes across the country. Flying made him feel alive. It was his peace, his power, his passion. But sometimes, even the strongest wings face unexpected storms. Music fades into a somber tone. Visuals. Tim in a doctor's office, silent, serious. The doctor gently explained something. One day, Tim started feeling strange. His vision blurred. His energy vanished. A few tests later, the doctor spoke the words that changed everything. Pause. You have type 1 diabetes. At that moment, his world went silent. For most people, it's a tough diagnosis. But for a pilot, it could mean losing your license, your wings, your dream, your identity. Slow piano melody. Visuals fade to Tim looking out at the runway. Planes taking off. The next weeks were the hardest of Tim's life. He watched other planes take off while he stood still on the ground. He felt powerless, like the sky had rejected him. Tim faced fear, frustration, and questions that had no easy answers. How will I manage my business? Will I ever fly again? Pause. But deep inside, another voice whispered, you can lose altitude, but you can climb again. Music shifts, hopeful strings begin softly. Visuals, Tim learning to check blood sugar, preparing healthy meals, jogging at sunrise. Tim made a choice. He wouldn't let diabetes define him. He would learn to live with it. He studied how to manage his blood sugar. He planned his me. He took insulin responsibly and tracked every number like a pilot checks instruments before flight. He built new discipline because for Tim, control wasn't just about flying. It was about survival, strength, and self-respect. Inspiring music rises, rhythmic and hopeful. Visuals. Tim in a medical checkup, smiling, simulator practice. Finally, a shot of him flying again. Months later, after dedication, consistency, and countless tests, Tim got medical clearance to fly again. That first takeoff was more than just a flight. It was freedom reborn. As the wheels lifted from the ground, he realized his wings were never truly taken away. They were just waiting for him to fight for them. Warm music, soft lighting. Visuals. Tim mentoring others with diabetes, speaking to young pilots, smiling confidently. Today, Tim balances his life as a businessman, pilot, and motivator. He shares his story to show others that diabetes doesn't end your journey. It simply gives it new direction. He teaches that strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising every single time you do. Music slows to emotional piano and strings, uplifting tone. Visuals: a plane flying through sunset skies, light breaking through clouds. Tim Cruz's story reminds us all, your challenges don't define you. Your courage does. So, to everyone living with diabetes, pause. You're not grounded. You're learning to fly differently. Keep fighting. Keep believing. And remember, the sky is still yours. For Tim Cruz, flying wasn't just a dream, it was his freedom. He was a successful businessman, a licensed pilot, and a man who felt most alive above the clouds. But one day, life gave him unexpected turbulence. Text on screen: the true story of Tim Cruz, businessman and pilot, type 1 diabetes. Gentle, uplifting music. Visuals: Tim walking toward a private plane, cockpit switches, smiling while flying. Since his early years, Tim was fascinated by the sky. He worked hard, built his own business, and earned his pilot's license through passion and persistence. Flying gave him peace. It was his escape, his confidence, his world. But then, the storm came. Music shifts to slow piano and strings. Visuals: Tim at work, looking tired, drinking water repeatedly, sitting down, feeling weak. One morning, Tim noticed something wasn't right. He felt constantly thirsty, exhausted, and dizzy. At first, he blamed stress and overwork. But when the symptoms worsened, he went to the doctor. Pause. The diagnosis was clear and painful. Type 1 diabetes. Visuals: Tim sitting silently, doctor speaking softly. For many, that's hard news. For a pilot, it can mean the end of your flying career. The regulations were strict. Tim's license was suspended until he could prove he could manage his condition safely. In that moment, the sky, his greatest love, fell out of reach. Somber music, muted colors. Visuals: Tim watching planes take off without him, standing alone by a hangar, holding his pilot headset. Days turned into weeks. Tim watched other pilots soar into the blue while he stayed grounded on the earth below. He felt anger, sadness, and fear. How could this happen to me? He thought. He had always been healthy, disciplined, successful. But diabetes doesn't discriminate. It could touch anyone, at any time. Pause. Still, deep inside, the pilot in him whispered, when you hit turbulence, you don't quit the flight, you steady your wings. Music begins to shift toward a hopeful tone. Visuals: Tim testing his blood sugar, injecting insulin, jogging in the morning light. Tim refused to give up. He learned everything about his new condition, how food, exercise, and insulin all work together. He built a new routine with the same focus he used in business and aviation. He managed his glucose levels with precision. Every reading, every meal, every reading, every meal, every decision, a part of his new flight plan. And slowly, his confidence returned. He was learning how to fly again, just in a different way. Inspiring music rises, triumphant tone. Visuals: Tim receiving medical clearance, walking toward his plane with a smile, starting the engine. After months of discipline, hard work, and medical evaluations, Tim achieved what many said was impossible. He was cleared to fly again. Visuals: cockpit camera view. Tim smiling as the plane takes off. As the plane lifted into the sky, he felt tears fill his eyes. It wasn't just another flight. It was proof that type 1 diabetes couldn't define him. It could only strengthen him. Soft, inspirational music. Visuals: Tim speaking to young pilots, sharing his journey, encouraging people with diabetes. Today, Tim Cruz continues to fly, both in the sky and through life. He runs his business, manages his health, and inspires others to do the same. He teaches that diabetes doesn't have to stop you. It can teach you to live smarter, fight harder, and rise stronger. Music softens, emotional tone. Visuals: plane flying through a sunset sky, golden clouds glowing. Tim's story is a reminder for everyone living with diabetes. You might face storms, but you still have the power to fly through them. Pause. Diabetes is not the end of your dreams. It's the start of a new flight plan, one that takes courage, control, and heart. So keep believing, keep fighting, and remember, the sky will always be yours. What if one diagnosis could take away your biggest dream? Pause. For Tim Cruise, the sky wasn't just a place, it was his life. A successful businessman, a passionate pilot. His days were filled with confidence, freedom, and flight. But life had other plans. Text on screen, the true story of Tim Cruise, businessman and pilot, type 1 diabetes. Peaceful, cinematic background music continues. Visuals. Bright morning at an airfield, Tim smiling. As he prepares his plane, engines roaring to life. Tim was living his dream. From running his own company to flying his private aircraft, everything he touched seemed to take off. He was focused, successful, and deeply in love with the sky. Every flight reminded him that the world had no limits. But then, his body began sending silent signals that something was wrong. Music fades to a soft, dramatic piano tone. Visuals. Tim feeling weak during a meeting, reaching for water repeatedly, sitting quietly in a doctor's office. It started with exhaustion. Then came constant thirst, blurry vision, and sudden weight loss. Tim thought it was just stress from work. But when he finally went for tests, the doctor looked at him and said the words he'll never forget. Pause. You have type 1 diabetes. The room went quiet. For a pilot, that diagnosis meant more than just injections or diets. It meant he might never fly again. Somber music begins, gray-toned visuals. Visuals. Tim standing near the runway, watching other planes take off, his pilot headset hanging loosely in his hand. Days turned into weeks. Tim's pilot's license was suspended until he could prove he could manage his condition safely. He felt trapped, grounded both physically and emotionally. The sky he once ruled now fell out of reach. He faced fear, anger, and doubt. Everything he worked for seemed to be slipping away. Pause. But the same discipline that made him a successful pilot whispered inside him. Don't quit. Adjust your flight plan. Hopeful piano music begins softly. Visuals. Tim checking his blood sugar, learning about insulin, jogging at sunrise, cooking healthy meals. Tim decided to take control. If diabetes wanted to challenge him, he'd meet it head on. He learned everything. How insulin worked, how food and exercise affected blood sugar, and how to balance life around this new condition. Each day became a mission. He tracked his readings with the precision of flight log. Every healthy choice was a small victory. He began to feel strong again, not because diabetes disappeared, but because he learned how to live with it. Inspiring music rises, cinematic pace quickens. Visuals. Tim attending a medical evaluation, confident smiles, cockpit simulator training. After months of discipline and determination, Tim finally reapplied for medical clearance to fly. It wasn't easy. There were strict checks, reviews, and long waits. But Tim's effort paid off. One day, the approval came through. He was allowed to fly again. Pause. That first takeoff was unforgettable. Visuals. Cockpit view. Sunrise flooding through the glass. Tim smiling as the plane lifts off. As the plane climbed higher, so did his spirit. He realized that diabetes hadn't taken away his wings. It had only made him stronger. Gentle, uplifting strings begin. Visuals. Tim mentoring young people with diabetes, speaking at events, flying confidently again. Today, Tim balances his business, his flying, and his health, showing others that diabetes doesn't mean defeat. He teaches that success isn't about avoiding turbulence, but about learning how to fly through it. He's living proof that discipline, courage, and belief can turn any challenge into a journey of strength. Emotional piano and strings swell, final montage. Visuals. Plane soaring through golden sunset clouds. Bright light fills the screen. Tim Cruise's story is a reminder for everyone living with diabetes. Your diagnosis doesn't define you. Your determination does. So if life ever grounds you, pause. Remember, the sky is still there. waiting for you to rise again. Keep fighting, keep believing, and never stop flying. Soft dramatic music begins. A plane cuts through clouds in slow motion. Voiceover begins. Imagine having your dream to fly among the clouds and suddenly being told you can't. Pause. That was the day Tim Cruz's life changed forever. He was a businessman, a pilot, a man whose heart belonged to the skies. But when he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, the world came crashing down. Dramatic pause, music deepens. Doctors told him his flying days were over. His license was suspended. His dream grounded. Montage, Tim checking his blood sugar, injecting insulin, staring at his grounded airplane. Tim felt like the sky had turned gray. He'd spent years building his business, working hard, and earning his pilot's license. But now, diabetes wasn't just a condition, it felt like a life sentence. Every day was a battle. Counting carbs, watching blood sugar, feeling dizzy at times, tired at others. And worst of all, the fear. What if my dream is gone for good? Soft piano music fades in. But Tim wasn't the kind of man to give up. Visuals, Tim sitting at his desk, researching. Cut to him jogging early morning. Scenes of hope. One morning, as the sun rose, Tim made a decision. He would not let diabetes define him. He started learning everything about type 1 diabetes, nutrition, insulin management technology. He talked to doctors, other pilots, and regulators. And slowly, hope returned. Inspiring music begins to rise. Thanks to new medical technology and strict diabetes management, the rules changed. And Tim was cleared to fly again. Footage, Tim in his pilot uniform walking toward a small aircraft. Engine starts. He smiles. The day Tim Cruz got back in the cockpit, it wasn't just about flying again. It was about proving that diabetes doesn't mean the end of your dreams. As the plane lifted off, Tim wasn't just climbing in altitude. He was rising above every doubt, every struggle, every you can't. Pause, inspiring music swells. Today, Tim runs a successful business and continues to inspire others living with type 1 diabetes. He proves that with discipline, courage, and self-belief, you can still fly high. Pause, soft, inspiring tone. To everyone out there living,